They demanded my new house be big enough for my golden brother's family, but my secret purchase left them screaming, "How are we supposed to fit?" For years, my family dismissed me as the quiet disappointment, the computer guy who just couldn't measure up to my golden child brother. But when they finally arrived at my new home, expecting a sprawling mansion fit for their whole family, the absolute shock and outrage on my mother's face, when she screamed, "How the hell are we supposed to fit in here?" was pure, sweet vindication. Honestly, I'm Mason Ellis, I'm 33, and I've pretty much been the family black sheep ever since I chose the world of programming over my father's beloved construction company. You see, while my older brother, Brian, the undisputed golden child, was meticulously building what they called the proper life, with a wife, kids, and a shiny corporate job, I was quietly, almost invisibly, creating a tech empire worth millions. So when my parents, completely oblivious, insisted I buy a house big enough for your brother's growing family to visit, I just smiled and nodded. They had absolutely no clue that I'd already bought my actual dream home, a minimalist cabin, so tiny it barely fit me, let alone a whole visiting entourage. Growing up in suburban Chicago, our split-level home on Oakwood Drive looked perfectly normal from the outside. But inside, oh man, inside there was an invisible scoreboard constantly tracking the Ellis brothers' achievements. And the tally? It always favored Brian. Our childhood bedrooms told the whole story, you know? Brian's walls were a shrine. Football trophies gleaming, baseball pennants waving, honor roll certificates framed perfectly. My space, though? It was a glorious mess of computer parts, programming books, and the custom PC I'd lovingly built at 14 after mowing lawns all summer long. Dad called Brian's room a champion showcase. Mine, he sneered, calling it an electronic junkyard. Look at your brother's report card. Mom would practically sing at dinner, waving Brian straight A's like a victory flag. Then she'd slide my report card across the table, straight A's in computer, science and math, mind you, but C's in everything I found soul-crushingly tedious, with a disappointed sigh that could curdle milk. Why can't you apply yourself like Brian? My father, Richard Ellis, the third-generation owner of Ellis Construction, had our futures meticulously mapped out before we were even born. We'd go to State University, join the family business, marry nice local girls, and build homes in the same neighborhood. Brian, of course, followed that blueprint perfectly. Me? I ripped it up the moment I discovered coding at 12. Computers are a phase, Dad would constantly scoff. Real men build things they can touch. The bitter irony that I was building incredibly complex, tangible systems completely escaped him. High school only widened the chasm between us. Brian was the football captain, prom king, class president. I was the robotics club founder, coding competition winner, the quiet kid teachers on parent-teacher nights described as brilliant but antisocial. When Brian scored the winning touchdown at homecoming, Dad hoisted him onto his shoulders, beaming. When I won the state technology competition with a logistics program I'd coded myself from scratch, Dad just asked, "But will it help you get into state?" You can imagine how that felt. The annual Ellis family barbecue wasn't a celebration. It was my annual assessment. Still playing with computers, Mason? Uncle Frank would ask, a patronizing smirk on his face. Aunt Catherine would then chime in, "Brian just got promoted again. Such a go-getter." The subtext was always crystal clear. Brian was the success. Mason was just dabbling. My senior year, Brian headed to State University on a partial athletic scholarship, majoring in business administration. Following that rigid Ellis roadmap, of course, I got accepted to MIT, and for a brief, fleeting moment, it sparked a flicker of parental pride. That quickly died, though, when they realized it might permanently derail my predestined path to Ellis Construction. MIT is across the country. Mom fretted, as if it were on another planet. State has a perfectly fine computer program, and you could room with your brother. Dad piled on, the family business needs. You hear, all this Silicon Valley nonsense is just a bubble waiting to burst. But I went to MIT anyway. It was the first truly significant deviation from the Ellis family plan, and it felt like breathing for the first time. During my sophomore year, I developed a prototype. supply chain optimization algorithm that caught the attention of several venture capitalists. When I called home with the news that I was dropping out to launch my startup, the explosion was absolutely nuclear. No, Ellis has ever quit college. Dad bellowed over the phone. You're throwing away your future for some computer fantasy. Mom took a different, more insidious approach. Brian finished his degree with honors while working part-time. If he can do it, why can't you just apply yourself? Always Brian. Always the comparison. Family gatherings became exercises in deflection and minimization. I'd arrive alone, no significant other, no impressive title from a recognizable company. Brian? He'd roll up with his college sweetheart turned wife, Amanda, his business cards proudly reading, Vice President, Midwest Division, from a Fortune 500 company, and eventually, photos of their perfect children, Emma and Jack. So, Mason, Aunt Catherine would begin, her voice dripping with thinly veiled pity, still doing that startup thing, as if building enterprise software was equivalent to selling friendship bracelets at a farmer's market. Brian just bought a beautiful home in Lakeside Estates. Mom would interject before I could even answer. 4 bedrooms, finished basement, incredible backyard for the kids. The pattern repeated for years. Brian married, climbed the corporate ladder, had children, bought the big suburban house, and checked every single box on the conventional success list. Me? I lived in a Spartan apartment in Boston, worked around the clock on my company, AITA, dated occasionally, but never brought anyone to family events. They wouldn't have survived the Ellis family inquisition. My parents' definition of success never evolved. College degree, traditional career, marriage, suburban house. With a yard, grandchildren. Anything deviating from this formula wasn't just different, it was wrong, disappointing, concerning. So I stopped sharing. I just let them believe whatever they wanted about my computer hobby while I built something revolutionary. Their dismissal, their doubt, it became my motivation. Each comparison to Brian simply added fuel to my absolute determination. The Christmas I turned 30, Brian announced they were expecting their 3rd child. Dad, beaming, opened an expensive bottle of scotch and proposed a toast to my son building the next generation of the Ellis family. I noticed it immediately. The singular my son, not my sons. I wasn't even part of the equation anymore. That night, I made a decision. I would prove them wrong. Not with arguments or explanations they wouldn't understand anyway, but with results they couldn't possibly ignore. The day I walked out of MIT's hallowed halls, voluntarily surrendering my secure future, as Dad called it, I had $12,000 saved, my custom-built laptop, and absolutely no safety net. My parents had made it crystal clear, this choice meant I was on my own. Boston's winter that year was brutal, matched only by the cold shoulder from my family. I found a tiny studio apartment in Cambridge, 300 square feet, questionable heating, and a bathroom so small I had to sit sideways on the toilet. The rent consumed nearly half my savings in the first month. 2 weeks into my self-imposed exile from academia, I attended a hackathon in a drafty warehouse space. That's where I met Zoe Reynolds, 5'4" with electric blue hair and a mind sharper than anyone I'd ever encountered. Zoe was pitching an idea that all the established tech bros in the room dismissed as logistically impossible. The problem, she ran it as we shared stale pizza afterward, is they're thinking about existing constraints. I'm building for what we could do if we reimagined the entire system. We clicked instantly, 2 outsiders with complementary skills and the same disdain for conventional thinking. By sunrise, we'd sketched the foundation of our company on coffee-stained napkins. By the end of the week, we were coding side by side in my tiny apartment. Our first 8 months were a blur of 20-hour workdays, ramen noodles, and the kind of intense collaboration that only happens between people equally obsessed with solving the same problem. We built 4 different prototypes before landing on the one that would eventually become AITA, an AI-driven logistics platform that revolutionized last-mile delivery optimization. Nobody believed in it. Not the angel investors we pitched, not the startup incubators that rejected our applications. Certainly not my family, who still referred to my work as Mason's computer thing during the rare strain calls home. Our first brush with bankruptcy came 10 months in. Zoe and I were down to our last $800 combined. We couldn't make next month's rent on our tiny shared office, let alone our apartments. That night, we sat on my building's rooftop, sharing a bottle of bottom-shelf vodka. Maybe they were right. I admitted, the closest I'd ever come to giving up. Maybe this is just a pipe dream. Zoe looked at me with fierce determination. Your family? You mean the ones who think the only path to success involves doing exactly what previous generations did? She took the bottle. Screw that. We're close. I can feel it. The next morning, hungover and desperate, we cold emailed the logistics director of Continental Shipping, practically begging for 15 minutes of his time. To our shock, he agreed to a video call. 3 days later, we had our first paying client and enough runway to survive another 4 months. The second near-death experience came 14 months later. We'd expanded too quickly, hired the wrong people, and nearly lost everything when a critical system failure caused a major client to miss thousands of deliveries during the holiday rush. Zoe and I worked 96 hours straight, surviving on energy drinks and sheer will, personally rewriting the code that saved the contract. Then came the breakthrough. Our algorithm outperformed every competitor in an industry benchmark test by 42%. Suddenly, the investors who'd ignored us were calling daily. The tech blogs that had never heard of us were requesting interviews. We had our pick of venture capital offers. We chose carefully, partners who valued our vision over quick returns. The first funding round brought in $4 million. We moved to real offices, hired a proper team, and finally paid ourselves enough to live without counting pennies. Through it all, I told my family nothing. Their picture of me remained frozen, unemployed college dropout playing with computers in some Boston basement. Each holiday visit, I'd endure there. Concerned questions and not-so-subtle comparisons to Brian's latest promotion or home renovation. 4 years into our journey, AITA was valued at $85 million. We had offices in Boston, Austin, and Seattle. Our client list included 3 of the top 5 e-commerce companies in the world. I bought my dream property, 20 acres of pristine woodland 2 hours outside Boston. I worked with an architectural firm specializing in sustainable, minimalist design to create my perfect home. A 1,200 square foot modernist cabin built of reclaimed wood and glass, powered entirely by renewable energy. The cabin was the antithesis of the suburban McMansions my family valued. No extra bedrooms for future children. No formal dining room for entertaining. No 3-car garage. Just open, thoughtfully designed space with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the forest. A state-of-the-art kitchen where I could indulge my newfound love of cooking, and a streamlined home office with fiber internet I'd paid a small fortune to have run to the property. It was during this time I met Allison Harper at a conservation fundraiser our company sponsored. Unlike the startup scene climbers suddenly interested in the successful entrepreneur, Allison, an environmental scientist specializing in woodland restoration, couldn't have cared less about my company's valuation or my net worth. I'm much more interested in what you're trying to protect than what you're trying to acquire, she told me on our second date as we hiked through a forest, remarkably similar to my own property. Success is about impact, not accumulation. With Allison, I found something my parents never understood: acceptance without conditions. She didn't need me to follow a prescribed path to earn her respect. My work fascinated her not because of the money it generated, but because of the efficiency it created and the waste it eliminated. As our relationship deepened, she asked the inevitable question, "Why haven't you told your family about your success?" I struggled to articulate the complicated emotions. They spent years telling me I was choosing the wrong path, that I'd fail, that I was throwing my life away. I paused. Part of me wants to prove them wrong dramatically, but another part, I don't know if I want people in my life who only value me when I meet their definition of success. Allison understood in a way my family never could. Together, we built a life that prioritized meaning over materialism, purpose over status. Our circle of friends consisted of people who knew the real me, not the disappointment my family perceived, or the tech wonder kid the business press occasionally profiled. I kept a deliberately low profile professionally. No flashy cars or designer clothes. No social media presence. Our company culture reflected this understated approach, focusing on innovation rather than self-promotion. For 6 years, I maintained this double life. Successful entrepreneur building a 9-figure company. By day, disappointing son by holiday obligation. The greater my actual success grew, the more satisfaction I took in my family's continued misconception. I was waiting for the perfect moment. The moment they'd realize how completely they'd misjudged me. That moment finally arrived when my parents called with news that Brian's growing family needed a larger house, but the real estate market had become challenging. In the same conversation, almost casually, my mother mentioned, "You know, Mason, it's time you bought a proper house too. Something with enough room for family visits. Brian's children should know their uncle's home." The implication was chillingly clear. My hypothetical future home should accommodate my brothers. Family star. Even my own imagined property wasn't truly mine in their eyes. It was an extension of Brian's needs. "I've actually been thinking about buying a place," I replied, a plan forming instantly in my mind. "That's wonderful," Mom exclaimed, genuine enthusiasm in her voice for the first time in years. "Something in a good neighborhood, I hope, with extra bedrooms." "I have something in mind," I said vaguely. "Maybe you all could come see it once I'm settled." The trap was set. After years of dismissal, the perfect opportunity for revelation had presented itself. I would finally show them exactly who I was and what I'd built, on my terms, in my space, with no possibility of rewriting the narrative. The formal invitation to visit my new home arrived in my parents' mailbox 3 weeks later. My precise handwriting on heavyweight cardstock, giving the occasion appropriate gravitas. I specified a weekend in late October, when the New England foliage would be at its spectacular peak, a detail my Midwestern family wouldn't consider significant until they saw it firsthand. I'd skipped the previous 2 family Christmases, claiming work emergencies. In reality, I'd taken Allison to Japan 1 year and New Zealand the next, grateful to replace tense family dinners with peaceful adventure. My mother's voicemails had been predictably guilt-inducing. Even Brian made time to bring his whole family home. Family should come first, Mason. This year, I was orchestrating a different kind of family gathering, one where I controlled the environment, the narrative, and the revelations. The timing felt perfect. AITA had just closed a funding round, valuing the company at $320 million. We were fielding acquisition offers from 2 tech giants. And the cabin, with Allison's expert ecological landscaping, had been featured in a prestigious architectural digest under the title Sustainable Minimalism, the Future of Luxury Living. Allison found me on our deck, overlooking the forest, reviewing my invitation's carefully chosen wording one last time before sending it. "You're really doing this?" she observed, wrapping her arms around me from behind. "It's time," I nodded. 6 years of letting them think I'm still struggling. 6 years of comparisons too. "Brian, I want them to see who I really am, what I've actually built. And if they still don't understand, if they criticize your choices anyway." Her question wasn't doubtful, just pragmatic. I turned to face her. "Then at least I'll know, and I can stop wondering if someday they'll see me." Clearly, she studied my face. "I'm proud of you, you know. Not for the company valuation or this beautiful home. For having the courage to be authentically yourself in a family that wanted to mold you into something else." I kissed her forehead. "Will you be here when they visit?" She shook her head. "This first encounter needs to be just you and them. I'd be a buffer, a distraction. They need to see you standing completely in your own power." The wisdom of her suggestion resonated. This confrontation had been building for decades. I needed to face it head-on, without emotional support. Systems that might soften the impact. Zoe noticed my distraction during our weekly executive meeting. Afterward, she cornered me in my office. "Spill it, Ellis. You've been somewhere else all morning." I showed her the invitation. "I'm finally going to tell them. Show them everything." Her eyes widened. "The company, the cabin, all of it. Every last detail." She whistled low. "I'd pay good money to see their faces." Then her expression turned serious. "Just remember something, okay? No matter how they react, it doesn't change who you are or what you've built. The week before my family's scheduled visit, I meticulously prepared the cabin, not changing anything to accommodate their expectations. Quite the opposite. I deliberately left the space exactly as Allison and I lived in it. Minimalist, efficient, and completely unsuited for housing a family of 5 overnight. The guest room remained my home office. The pantry stocked our usual organic, locally sourced foods rather than the processed brands my nibbling nephews preferred. The single bathroom featured our sustainable products in their plain packaging rather than the commercial brands my parents recognized. I was presenting my authentic life, not a version curated for their approval. It felt both terrifying and liberating. The morning they were scheduled to arrive, I woke before sunrise and hiked to the ridge overlooking the property. The October air was crisp, the forest a spectacular tapestry of crimson and gold. I watched dawn break over my land, 20 acres of pristine woodland I protected from development. The sleek architectural lines of my cabin, barely visible among the trees, exactly as I'd intended. This was my success, not measured in square footage or spare bedrooms, not validated by its suitability for Brian's children. My success on my terms. I returned to the cabin and prepared a simple breakfast of locally sourced eggs and sourdough toast. At precisely 9 o'clock, my phone chimed with a text from my father. GPS says we're 30 minutes away. This place is really in the middle of nowhere. I smiled. They had no idea. The distinctive sound of tires on gravel announced their arrival. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched my father's SUV, a new, expensive model he'd undoubtedly purchased to impress the neighbors, navigate the narrow driveway with visible difficulty. The vehicle was comically oversized for the minimalist parking area, designed for at most 2 modest cars. My mother emerged first, her expression already confused as she surveyed the small cabin. Dad followed, frowning as he noted the lack of manicured lawn or conventional landscaping. Brian helped his wife, Amanda, from the back seat, then began unloading what appeared to be enough luggage for a week-long stay, rather than the 2-day visit I'd specified. Their children, Emma, 8, Jack, 6, and toddler Lily, tumbled out last, immediately running toward the woods before being sharply called back by Amanda. I stepped onto the deck, observing them without immediately announcing my presence. They looked exactly as I'd expected, dressed for a different occasion in pressed khakis and polo shirts, confusion mounting as they took in the modest cabin rather than the sprawling residence they'd clearly anticipated. "Mason," Mom called, spotting me. Is this where you're staying?" The question was so telling. Not, "Is this your beautiful home?" but, "Is this temporary lodging?" I descended the 3 steps to the gravel path. "Welcome to my home." Dad's handshake was firm but brief, his eyes darting beyond me to the cabin. "Interesting structure you've got here, son." Mom hugged me tightly, whispering, "It's certainly unique," in a tone that conveyed her disapproval more clearly than outright criticism. Brian clapped my shoulder with forced enthusiasm. "Hey, little brother. Finally, joining the property ladder, huh? This is quite a starter home." The condescension was palpable. "Hey, starter home," implying this was merely a stepping stone to a real house, like his suburban fortress. Amanda smiled tightly, already looking uncomfortable as she scanned the surroundings and clearly found them wanting. "The children are excited for our weekend in the woods." I led them inside, watching as their expressions shifted from confusion to barely concealed horror. The open-concept main living area, which Allison and I found perfectly proportioned, suddenly seemed small with 6 adults and 3 children crowded inside. "It's very efficient," Mom offered, clearly struggling to find something positive to say. Dad was less diplomatic. "Where's the rest of it?" "This is it," I replied simply. 1,200 square feet of perfectly designed space. Brian laughed, assuming I was joking. "No, seriously. Where are the bedrooms? The kids need to put their stuff somewhere." "There's the primary bedroom." I pointed to the partially visible space beyond a sliding wooden panel. "And my office has a daybed for occasional guests." A silence fell as the implications sank in. 6 adults and 3 children, 1 proper bedroom, and 1 office with a single daybed. Mom found her voice first. But where will everyone sleep? I shrugged. I assumed you'd get a hotel in town. The invitation specified the dates, but not overnight accommodations. The stage was set. The first cracks in their assumptions had appeared. Now it was time to shatter them completely. The cabin's main living area suddenly felt even smaller as my family processed the accommodation. Reality. My mother clutched her designer handbag like a shield. Dad paced the limited floor space, running calculations in his head. Brian and Amanda exchanged alarmed glances, while their children, oblivious to the tension, explored the open-concept space with unrestrained energy. "You can't be serious," Mom finally said. "We drove 6 hours to stay for 2 nights. Of course, we expected to sleep here." I maintained a calm expression. "I'm surprised you assumed that. The cabin is clearly designed for 1 or 2 people. But it's a house." Dad interjected, as though the very definition of house automatically included guest accommodations. "Houses have guest rooms." "Some houses do," I corrected. "Mine has exactly what I need and nothing more." Brian, ever the peacemaker when it suited his purposes, stepped forward. "Okay, let's figure this out. Mom and Dad can take the bedroom. Amanda and I can use the office daybed. The kids can sleep in sleeping bags in the living room." "Actually," I replied, "the bedroom is mine. I didn't invite anyone to stay overnight." The tension escalated palpably. My father's face flushed red, the same shade it turned when I'd announced dropping out of MIT years earlier. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You invite your family to see your new home, but there's nowhere for us to stay? What were you thinking?" "I was thinking you'd see my home. We'd have dinner, and you'd stay in a hotel like normal people visiting family often do." Mom's expression shifted from confusion to hurt. "But we always stay with Brian when we visit. His guest rooms are specifically decorated for us." Of course, they were. Brian's life was designed around family approval. Mine was not. "Mason," Brian intervened, his corporate conflict resolution training evident in his measured tone. "When Mom and Dad told us you'd bought a house and invited us all to visit, we naturally assumed it would be, well, an actual house." "This is an actual house," I replied evenly. "It's just not the house you expected." Jack, Brian's 6-year-old, chose that moment to run through the room, accidentally knocking over a handcrafted ceramic vase, a gift from Allison, that shattered on the polished concrete floor. "Jack," Amanda scolded, ineffectually, grabbing at him as he continued his circuit around the furniture. "It's fine," I said, though it wasn't. "That was just a one-of-a-kind piece from an artist Allison introduced me to." "Who's Allison?" Mom asked immediately, latching on to the unfamiliar name. "My partner," I said. "She's an environmental scientist." Another bombshell. In 6 years, I'd never mentioned Allison's existence to my family. Mom looked stricken. "You have a girlfriend serious enough to buy art with, and we're just hearing about her now." "We've been together 4 years," I said calmly, watching their expressions register this new information. Dad shook his head in disbelief. "This is absurd. You've apparently been hiding a relationship, and now you've dragged us all the way out here to show us this." He gestured dismissively at my carefully designed living space. "Emma," the 8-year-old tugged at her mother's sleeve. "I'm hungry." "When's lunch?" "Good question," Brian added, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. "What's the plan for food, Mason?" I walked to the refrigerator and opened it, revealing the carefully prepared meal I'd planned: a locally sourced charcuterie board, artisanal bread, and fresh vegetables from the farmer's market. "This isn't enough for everyone," Amanda noted with poorly concealed horror. "The children need proper food. Hot food. There's a fantastic farm-to-table restaurant in town," I suggested. "We could go there for dinner." "Town is 30 minutes away," Dad exploded. "How is any of this practical? Why would you buy property so isolated, with a house so inadequate?" The moment had arrived. I'd endured decades of comparisons, dismissals, and assumptions. Now I would finally reveal the truth. "Let me show you something," I said quietly, leading them to my office, the room they'd assumed would serve as overflow sleeping space for their unplanned overnight stay. I unlocked the door with my fingerprint and opened it to reveal not just a standard home office, but a fully equipped command center, 3 large monitors displaying real-time data, a custom-built desk that had been featured in a design magazine, and wall-mounted screens showing operations across multiple time zones. What is all this? Mom asked, clearly bewildered. I sat in my ergonomic chair and turned to face them. This is where I run AITA Technologies. My company. Blank stares greeted this revelation. AITA, I repeated. The logistics optimization platform that powers deliveries for most major e-commerce companies. The company I co-founded 6 years ago that's now valued at $320 million. The silence that followed was absolute. I could almost hear their mental calculations attempting to process this information. That's not possible, Dad finally stammered. You've been struggling with that computer startup thing, living in a small apartment in Boston. That was 7 years ago, I corrected. I haven't been struggling for a very long time. Brian found his voice. 300 million? You're saying your company is worth $300 million and 20. I added calmly. As of our last funding round, Mom sank onto the daybed, her legs seemingly unable to support her. But you never said anything. All these years, you never asked. I replied simply. You were too busy comparing me to Brian to notice I was building something significant. Dad's expression shifted rapidly between disbelief, shock, and something new, a calculating interest. If this is true, if your company is really worth that much, why are you living in this tiny cabin? In the middle of nowhere? You could afford a real house. There it was. Even faced with evidence of extraordinary success, he still couldn't comprehend choices different from his own. This is a real house, I said firmly. My real house, on 20 acres of conservation land that I own. Outright, designed specifically for my needs and values, not to impress anyone else. Brian studied me with new eyes. So all these years when we thought you were failing, a disappointment, I supplied. The son who couldn't measure up. Yes, I was actually building a company that's now worth more than Ellis Construction could generate in 50 years. The calculated precision of this comparison wasn't accidental. I'd done the math. Dad flinched visibly. But why keep it secret? Mom asked, genuine confusion in her voice. We would have been so proud. Would you? I challenged. Or would you have found a way to diminish it? To suggest it wasn't real success because it didn't follow the path you approved? Because it didn't result in a big suburban house with guest rooms specifically decorated for your visits? The uncomfortable truth hung in the air between us. Dad, ever practical, attempted to regain control of the situation. Well, this changes things. With this kind of success, you should be thinking about legacy, about the future, about a proper home for eventually raising a family. This is my proper home, I stated firmly. And if Allison and I decide to have children, which isn't certain, we'll expand thoughtfully, not extravagantly. The mention of Allison redirected Mom's focus. I still can't believe you've been with someone for years without introducing her to your family. I love her too much to subject her to what I've experienced at family gatherings for the past decade. The words landed like a physical blow. Mom recoiled, tears welling in her eyes. Brian, sensing the conversation spiraling, attempted intervention. Look, this is a lot to process for everyone, but the immediate issue remains. Where are we all going to sleep tonight? I stood up. As I said, I recommend the Cedar Inn in town. It's quite charming. How the hell are we supposed to fit in a small town inn? Dad exploded, his frustration finally boiling over. We have 3 children. We need space. We need proper accommodations. Then you should have confirmed the sleeping arrangements before driving 6 hours. With assumptions about my life and home, I replied evenly. Just like you should have asked about my career instead of assuming I was failing because I wasn't following Brian's path. The confrontation had reached its crescendo. In one afternoon, I'd completely inverted their understanding of who I was, what I had built, and most importantly, whose terms I was living on. Mom was crying silently now. Dad looked shell-shocked. Brian appeared to be recalculating our entire relationship in real time. Amanda was frantically trying to prevent her children from destroying anything else in my meticulously designed space. I think, I said into the charged silence, we should all take a moment to regroup. I've prepared lunch as I mentioned. We can eat on the deck, overlooking the forest. Then perhaps you can decide whether you'd like to stay and get to know the real me, or if you'd prefer to head back home earlier than planned. I walked past them to the kitchen, leaving them to absorb the seismic shift in family dynamics that had just occurred. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the October forest blazed in spectacular color, a beauty they hadn't even noticed yet, too consumed by their shattered expectations of what success should look like. The lunch that followed our confrontation unfolded in strained silence on my expansive deck. The forest's autumn splendor spread before us, a tapestry of crimson, gold, and burnt orange that would have typically inspired awe. Instead, my family picked at their food, the charcuterie boards. Carefully selected artisanal offerings largely ignored as they processed the revelations of the morning. The children, mercifully oblivious to the tension, happily devoured the fresh bread and honey I provided as an alternative to the cured meats. Their chatter provided the only relief from the awkward silence that had descended among the adults. Eventually, Dad cleared his throat. "Mason, we should discuss this company of yours in more detail. I'd like to understand exactly what it is you do." The question was loaded. Not, "I'm proud of what you've built," or "tell me about your journey." Instead, it carried the implicit challenge, proof. To me, this is real star. AITA uses artificial intelligence to optimize delivery routes for e-commerce and logistics companies, I explained. We reduce fuel consumption by an average of 34%, while increasing delivery speed by 28%. Our clients include 3 of the 5 largest online retailers in the world. Dad nodded, clearly trying to find something familiar to grasp onto. "So, it's like a trucking business, but with computers?" I suppressed a sigh. "Not exactly. We don't own any vehicles. We create the intelligence that tells other companies' vehicles the most efficient way to deliver their packages." "And this is worth $300 million?" he asked skeptically. $320 million at our last valuation, I corrected. "We're currently fielding acquisition offers that would value us considerably higher." Brian leaned forward, his business interest piqued. "Who's offering to acquire?" "You." "I can't share that information. Confidentiality agreements." Mom, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "I just don't understand why you kept all this from us. We're your family." The hurt in her voice was genuine, which made my response more difficult. "The same reason I didn't tell you about Allison, or this property, or anything else important in my life. You've never shown interest in who I actually am, only in who you wanted me to be." "That's not fair," she protested weakly. "Isn't it?" I challenged. "When's the last time you asked about my work without comparing it to Brian's? When have you ever celebrated my choices instead of questioning them?" She had no answer. Amanda, sensing an opportunity to escape the tension, stood up. "I should get the children settled for their nap. Perhaps we could use your bedroom just for that, Mason." Before I could respond, Jack announced loudly, "I don't want a nap. I want to explore the forest." Brian immediately shut this down. "Absolutely not. It's not safe." "Actually," I interjected, "I have well-maintained trails throughout the property. I could show them some of the wildlife observation points I've built." Emma's eyes lit up. "Are there deer and foxes?" "Sometimes," I smiled, "the first genuine ones since their arrival. There's a family of beavers building a dam in the stream, too." The children's excitement provided a welcome respite from the adult tension. After some negotiation, Brian and Amanda reluctantly agreed to let me take the kids on a short nature walk while they discussed accommodation options with my parents. Leading my niece and nephews along the forest path, I felt a surprising connection forming. These children didn't care about my company valuation or the size of my house. Emma asked intelligent questions about the different tree species. Jack collected interesting rocks and sticks with serious dedication. Even little Lily, strapped to my back in a carrier Amanda had grudgingly provided, seemed transfixed by the dappled sunlight through the leaves. When we returned to the cabin an hour later, rosy-cheeked and significantly muddier, the adults had apparently reached a decision. "We've called the Cedar Inn," Dad announced. "They have rooms available. We'll stay there tonight, and tomorrow as planned, then head home Sunday." The concession was significant. Rather than cutting the visit short in anger, they were adapting to the reality I presented. It wasn't acceptance yet, but it was acknowledgement, a first step. As Brian and Amanda gathered the children's things for the trip into town, Mom pulled me aside, her expression troubled. "I need to understand something," she said quietly. "Have we really been so terrible that you felt you needed to hide your entire life from us?" The vulnerability in her question caught me off guard. I'd prepared for anger, defensiveness, even continued dismissal. I hadn't expected genuine self-reflection. "It wasn't about hiding," I explained, softening my tone. "It was about protection. Every time I shared something important to me, it was measured against Brian's choices and found wanting. Eventually, I stopped sharing because the comparison was too painful." Tears welled in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted what was best for you." "No," I corrected gently. "You wanted what you thought was best, what made sense to you, what worked for Brian. You never tried to understand what I needed or valued, because you never explained it in a way we could understand." A tear spilled down her cheek. "You just expected us to trust that dropping out of college for some computer idea was sensible. Parents worry. Mason, that's our job. Worry is one thing. Constant comparison is another." I leaned against the deck railing. "Do you know what it's like to hear about Brian's accomplishments at every family gathering? To have my choices questioned and criticized year after year? To be treated like the family disappointment?" She flinched. "We never called you a disappointment. You didn't have to say it." It was in every sigh, every change of subject when my work came up, every time you highlighted Brian's conventional successes as though they were the only kind that mattered. Before she could respond, Dad joined us, his expression unusually subdued. He placed a hand on Mom's shoulder in silent solidarity. "Son," he began awkwardly, "I think we owe you an apology. We might not have understood what you were doing, but that doesn't excuse how we made you feel." The admission stunned me. In 33 years, I'd never heard my father acknowledge a mistake. "I didn't understand your work," he continued. "I still don't. Not really. But that doesn't mean it isn't valuable or impressive." "It wasn't about understanding the technical details," I replied. "It was about respecting my choices, even if they were different from what you would choose." Mom wiped her eyes. "We just wanted security for you, a steady path, a traditional life that we understood." No, I sighed, "but that's not who I am. It never was. And instead of accepting that, you spent years trying to make me more like Brian." As if summoned by his name, my brother appeared at the sliding door, overnight bags in hand. "The kids are ready to go. We should head to the inn before it gets too late." An awkward silence fell. The conversation felt unfinished, yet the logistics of the evening demanded attention. "We'll continue this tomorrow," Dad said finally. "Perhaps we could come back for breakfast. Start fresh." The olive branch was unexpected. "I'd like that," I replied honestly. As they prepared to leave for town, Brian hung back, waiting until our parents were occupied with the children. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. "Just us." I nodded, leading him to a private corner of the deck. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a rare gesture of discomfort from my perpetually composed brother. I had no idea, Mason, about any of it. The company, this place, how you felt about us, about me. There was genuine remorse in his voice that caught me off guard. "It wasn't about you personally," I clarified. "You were just living the life they approved of, the life I was constantly measured against." "Still," he insisted, "I should have seen it. Should have said something when they compared us. I guess I liked being the successful one." His honesty was disarming. It's not easy being the golden child either, you know? The expectations never stop. For the first time, I glimpsed something I'd never considered, my brother's own struggles with our parents' rigid definitions of success. "The funny thing is," he continued with a hollow laugh, "my perfect life isn't so perfect. That big house is drowning us in debt. The corporate job I hate keeps me away from my kids 60 hours a week. Amanda and I barely talk anymore except about schedules and expenses." The confession stunned me. I had no idea. "How could you? We're all playing our assigned roles." He gestured toward the SUV where our parents were loading children. The beautiful son, the rebel, Mom and Dad oblivious to both. For the first time in decades, I looked at my brother, really looked at him. Beyond the perfect facade, I saw fatigue, strain, the weight of maintaining an appearance of success that was hollowing him out. It's not too late to change, I offered, to build something different. He shook his head. Easy for you to say. You broke away. I'm trapped in the life they wanted for me. And now my kids expect the big house and expensive schools, and Amanda would never. He trailed off, then met my eyes directly. How did you do it? Find the courage to walk away from what was expected. The question was so genuine, so vulnerable, that my lingering resentment began to dissolve. I stopped caring about approval I was never going to get. Started building for myself instead of trying to prove something. As they finally departed for town, the cabin fell into blessed silence. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat on the deck, watching twilight descend over my forest. The confrontation had gone differently than I'd imagined. Instead of triumph, I felt a strange mixture of relief and melancholy. I texted Allison. They know everything now. Coming to terms with it. Miss you. Her reply came instantly. Proud of you. This is hard, but necessary. Love you. Staring at the darkening woods, I realized that the revelation wasn't an end point, but a beginning. The real work of potentially rebuilding relationships on honest foundations was just starting. The evening alone in my cabin provided much-needed space to process the day's emotional whirlwind. Sitting by the fireplace with a glass of single malt, I found myself replaying key moments from the confrontation, noting the subtle shifts in my family's perceptions. Not just their shock at my success, but the first glimmers of genuine self-reflection I'd seen from them in years. Morning arrived with crisp autumn air and golden light filtering through the trees. I rose early, centering myself with a meditative hike along my favorite trail before preparing for my family's return. Instead of the elaborate breakfast I might have planned to impress them, I made simple, honest food. Fresh eggs from a neighboring farm, sourdough bread I'd baked myself, local honey, and fruit. The text arrived at 8:45 a.m. On our way. Should be there by 9:15. Dad. The formality of the message spoke volumes. My father, who typically communicated in abrupt commands, was making an effort at respect. When they arrived, the dynamic had visibly shifted. Gone were the pressed khakis and polo shirts of the previous day. Instead, my family wore casual, comfortable clothing, a small but significant concession to the environment they were entering. The children bounded from the car without being reminded to be careful, already excited to return to the forest they'd glimpsed yesterday. We brought coffee, Mom offered, holding up a carrier from the town bakery and some pastries the innkeeper recommended. The gesture, acknowledging my food preferences might be different without criticism, felt like a tentative olive branch. We settled on the deck, the morning sun warming the space as the children happily explored the perimeter of the clearing under Amanda's watchful eye. We've been talking, Dad began, uncharacteristic hesitation in his voice. About yesterday, about everything really. Mom nodded. We owe you an apology, Mason. A real one. The sincerity in her tone caught me off guard. I'd expected perhaps a grudging acknowledgement, not genuine contrition. For years, she continued, we measured your choices against a yardstick that made sense to us, without considering it might not be the right measure for you. Dad cleared his throat. I pushed you toward Ellis Construction, because it was the path I understood. When you chose something different, I assumed it was rebellion, rather than passion. We were wrong, Mom added simply. Yesterday made that abundantly clear. There. Words hung in the autumn air, the closest thing to validation I'd received from them in my adult life. I felt a knot of tension I'd carried for decades begin to loosen slightly. I appreciate that, I said carefully. But I need you to understand something important. My company's valuation doesn't validate my path. It was the right path for me, regardless of financial outcome. Dad nodded slowly. I'm trying to understand that. It's not easy to shift perspective after 70 years. But we want to, Mom added, if you'll give us the chance. Brian, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. I think what yesterday showed all of us is that success looks different for different people. My version has always been visible, traditional. Yours was hidden, but no less significant. Amanda joined the conversation, surprising me with her insight. I think what Brian's trying to say is that we've all been trapped in roles without realizing it. You as the rebel, Brian as the perfect son, your parents as the arbiters of what success should look like. The observation was startlingly perceptive from someone I'd always viewed as merely an extension of my brother's conventional choices. Yesterday was a shock, Dad admitted. Not just learning about your company and this property, but realizing how completely we'd misunderstood your life, your values. We'd like to know the real you, Mom said softly. If you're willing to share that with us now. The request felt genuine in a way previous family interactions never had. Not demanding compliance with their expectations, but expressing interest in who I actually was. I'd like that, I replied honestly. What followed was the most authentic conversation I'd had with my family in 20 years. I told them about meeting Zoe, about our near failures and breakthroughs, about discovering that success for me meant impact rather than accumulation, about finding Allison and building a relationship based on shared values rather than societal expectations. They listened, really listened, without interrupting to compare my experiences to Brian's or to suggest how I could have done things differently. When I finished, Brian asked the question that clearly had been weighing on him. Do you think, is it possible to change course mid-journey? To reshape a life that's already in progress? The vulnerability in his query made it clear he wasn't asking theoretically. I think authenticity is always possible, I answered carefully. It might require difficult conversations and uncomfortable changes, but the alternative is continuing to live a life that doesn't reflect your true values. He nodded thoughtfully, exchanging a meaningful glance with Amanda that suggested private conversations had occurred overnight. As the morning progressed into afternoon, something unexpected happened. The rigid family dynamics that had defined us for decades began to soften around the edges. Dad explored my sustainable energy systems with genuine interest, his builder's mind appreciating the technical innovation, even if the aesthetic remained foreign to his sensibilities. Mom discovered unexpected joy in the minimalist lifestyle, admitting the simplicity brought a peace she hadn't anticipated. I always thought more was better, she confessed one evening as we watched sunset from the deck. Bigger house, more possessions, more traditional achievements. But there's something clarifying about this place, about having exactly what you need and nothing you don't. The observation revealed a willingness to question long-held assumptions that I'd never witnessed in her before. By summer, enough healing had occurred that Allison and I accepted an invitation to the annual Ellis family reunion, an event I'd avoided for years. The gathering that had once been an exercise in comparison and judgment now held the possibility of authentic connection. As we pulled into the familiar park where generations of Elises had gathered each July, I felt a momentary trepidation. Old patterns ran deep. Would the extended family's perceptions have evolved as my immediate family's had? The answer came in unexpected forms. Uncle Frank, who had dismissed my computer hobby for years, approached with genuine curiosity about Optarut after reading about the company in a business magazine. Aunt Catherine, whose comparisons had once cut deepest, made a point of introducing Allison to everyone with warm enthusiasm. The most profound moment came during the traditional family photo. As we arranged ourselves in generational rows, my father placed his hands on my and Brian's shoulders, drawing us both equally close. My sons, he said simply to the photographer. Not my successful son and the other 1 inch, just my sons, equal in value, if different in path. That evening, as extended family dispersed and we gathered around the remaining embers of the barbecue, Brian surprised everyone by announcing his consultancy's first major client, a national corporation committing to sustainable business practices. The achievement was significant, representing both professional success and alignment with his newly embraced values. I watched my parents' reactions carefully. There was pride, certainly, but not the effusive celebration that once would have implicitly diminished my different choices. Instead, Dad raised his glass in a toast to both my sons finding success on their own terms. The words, simple but profound, encapsulated the journey we'd all undertaken since that confrontational weekend at my cabin. As autumn returned, painting my forest in the same spectacular colors that had backdropped our confrontation a year earlier. I found myself reflecting on the journey. The revelation I'd orchestrated hadn't delivered the vindication I'd expected. Instead, it had created something more valuable. The possibility of authentic family connections based on who we actually were, not who we were expected to be. The most profound lesson wasn't about proving my success or forcing acknowledgement of my choices. It was the recognition that true freedom comes not from external validation but from internal alignment. The courage to build a life authentic to your own values, regardless of others' expectations. My minimalist cabin stood as a physical manifestation of this truth. Not a rejection of family, but an affirmation of authenticity. Not an attempt to prove anything, but a commitment to living in accordance with my deepest values. One evening, as Allison and I sat on our deck, watching twilight settle over the forest, she asked a question that cut to the heart of the year's transformation. Are you at peace with them now, with your family? I considered carefully before answering. Not completely. Decades of patterns don't disappear in a year, but we're building something new. Something based on seeing each other clearly rather than through the lens of expectation. And that feels like a kind of healing I never thought possible. She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. The house that finally brought your family together was the one they initially couldn't accept. Her observation captured perfectly the paradox of our journey. My parents had demanded a house big enough for my brother's family, expecting me to conform to their definition of success. My silent move, purchasing this minimalist cabin that reflected my authentic values, had forced a confrontation that ultimately led to genuine connection, not through compliance with their expectations, but through the courage to stand firmly in my truth and invite them to see me clearly at last. Have you ever felt pressured to follow someone else's definition of success, or found yourself living a life that looks good to others but doesn't feel authentic to you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe to hear more authentic life experiences, and share with anyone who might be struggling to break free from others' expectations. Remember, the most powerful thing you can do is build a life that reflects your genuine values, even when others don't initially understand. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you courage on your own journey to authenticity.